Very good. Let's start. We know that more people are coming on their way. There we go. It's not the easiest place to get to, and this is a very busy time in Brussels, so they are all visiting the Jingsu Canon exhibition at the ground floor. I don't know, but let's start, shall we? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome for those of you here in the room and those of you watching online. Welcome to this Science Business Conference on Securing Europe. What should the EU prioritize to support its critical sectors? My name is Marilyn Fiaschi. I'm the CEO of Science Business, and for those of you who don't know Science Business, we are a news company that specializes in European and international research and innovation policy. All right. We also run a network that brings together about 80 organizations, a variety of organizations that range from research-intensive universities to National Council for Research, research infrastructures, government agencies, multinationals, NGOs. So it's this most hybrid, bizarre group that actually is enriched by the variety of its members. And for the members, just so you know, what we do is that we deliver intelligence, networking opportunities, as well as just opportunities to be more visible in the research and innovation policy landscape. Last time, come in, Ronald. Last time we organized an event around defense was in October 2024. Since then, a lot has changed, and not enough has changed. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is still going on. The geopolitical tensions have reached a new level, up, unfortunately. And since the fall last year, a new commission has taken office. And this commission has been pretty productive. There's been a lot of strategies, policy, political orientations that have been presented, and de facto, defense and security have risen to the top of the EU political agenda. And through a preparedness strategy, the Commission has taken unprecedented steps to better anticipate future threats. Okay? While with COVID, we've been already used to the notions of technology sovereignty and strategic autonomy and made in Europe. Well, in recent months, there are new concepts that have made their way to the European rhetoric: rearm EU, protect EU. All right, so we are entering a new paradigm, a new era. What is at stake? Well, the need for Europe to be a leading voice in global geopolitics. Of course, the need to ensure the security of its citizens and the resilience of its economy, but also the need to stand firm and be able to defend itself if a threat materializes. At the same time, the Commission have launched, we all witnessed that, a competitiveness plan on steroids, and more than ever, I think innovation is at the heart of European politics. So Europe needs to secure its key sectors, and we will start by a first session on critical infrastructures. After that, we will look at how military research and civilian research can cross-fertilize in order to make the most out of cutting-edge technology development and disruptive innovation. After the coffee break, we'll take a detour to Ukraine to explore how the security of Ukrainian infrastructures matter for all of Europe. All right, and then we'll end with the role of space innovation for defense and security. So that's what we have on the menu for this afternoon. There are a few programs that are scattered around the room. There is a QR code, so feel free to download it. There you'll have a more detailed program and biographies of the speakers. Just a last element before we kick off. We are a news company, so there are journalists in the room. All right. So if the speakers do a good job, there should be highlights picked up in the news and disseminated through Science Business channels. And finally, I'd like to thank the network members for their support, as well as Indra for making this conference possible today. All right, so with this, it's my pleasure to kick off the program and to hand over to my colleague Simon Pickard, Network Director, who will guide us through the first session. Welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. And time to get going with the content, the substance, with our opening plenary session, which, as you will have seen from the agenda, is titled Resilient Network. What are the innovations needed to protect Europe's critical infrastructures? I think the broad framing is there in the title, but to recap, this is very much raising a question about how Europe can develop a technology innovation ecosystem that protects its networks, its systems, and its structures on which many different industry sectors rely. Okay? It's part of this broader preparedness, resilience, and security agenda that Marilyn has already mentioned. And of course, it's in the context not just of physical protection, but also the growing and increasingly complex array of hybrid and digital threats that Europe has to confront in this day and age, and will continue to do so for the years ahead. So in that context, I'm very pleased to have 4 very eminent guests to join me on stage. I'd like to invite them to come up onto stage, and as they do, I will introduce them. So first, Martin Übelhuhr, who's the Deputy Head of Unit for Innovation and Security Research at DG Home, European Commission. Martin, just choose whichever seat you like. Second, David Luengo Riesco, who's the Head of the Brussels office at the Indra Group. Third, Irina Kupiainen, who is the Director for EU Affairs Policy and Business Development at CSC IT Centre for Science in Finland. And last but by no means least, Nicolas Ott, who's the Director for Cybersecurity and Defence Policy for Microsoft Corporate and Legal here in Brussels. So a very warm welcome to you all. You may want to help yourself to glasses of water in case the temperature kicks up throughout our session. Now, Marilyn, in her opening remarks, referenced this plethora of strategies, plans, acts, commitments, declarations, foresight, blueprints, guidelines, you name it. We've been bombarded in the first 6 months of the new Commission's mandate, underlining the urgency of action for security and defence in Europe. But my question to you, just to get things going, is whether or not you think, beyond the rhetoric and the something must be done announcements, how well prepared do you think Europe is to face its security threats and situations today? And by extension, do you think the pan-European nature of all of these risks is fully understood? So I'm going to give you all 2 or 3 minutes to share some opening thoughts on that. Let's start at the end of the stage and move back in this direction. Martin, what's your take on how well prepared we are for today's security challenges?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the invitation. I think we're really going through a very fast learning in terms of building up our resilience, and I think we're not speaking about awareness raising anymore. We're speaking about the actual kind of how to make it happen. From that angle, I would like to be positive in that we've really read the signs of the time. I would like to speak briefly about the threats. We're not at war, but I don't think we're really at peace anymore either here in Europe. So we see sabotage driven by state-sponsored sabotage, espionage, industrial espionage, terrorism, organized crime, and all of this affects our critical infrastructures, or kind of takes place within our critical infrastructures. Speaking of undersea cables, speaking of railway networks, speaking of public places, public spaces, schools, unfortunately. Ports, for example, are very much in the focus when we talk about fighting organized crime and fighting drug trafficking. For us, ports are critical infrastructure. So the threats are various, but the threats are identified. As you said also in the intro, there's a digital element to it more often than not, in addition to the physical element of the threat landscape. So sometimes we're speaking of new infrastructures, completely digital infrastructures. Sometimes this is really old physical legacy infrastructure with a new digital layer on top, where that digital layer has created additional vulnerabilities and additional complexity. The actors, in terms of having to respond, I think the actors are both public and private. So in DG Home, we always work with police forces, basically state authorities, but we equally work with operators of critical infrastructures who more often than not are private. So awareness is there, regulation has been there for quite a while. Maybe we managed to speak about the NIS directive, CER directives. So we have a good ground to build on.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I've no doubt that we're going to come back to some of the regulatory questions, not least with Nicolas. But David, let's hear from you and your take on how well prepared Europe is today, and in particular this question about the pan-European dimensions of security and risk. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And thanks to Science Business for the invitation and for organizing this event. I think this is very timely. If you talk to the relevant policymakers today in Brussels, they all will say that security and defense and competitiveness are among the two main topics in the agenda today, and not only today, in the coming negotiations for the multi-annual financial framework, which is, I believe, of interest for all of us, and what are the priorities, what would be the structure. In 2 minutes, I cannot summarize everything, or at least everything I would like to say. But
we'll have time to come back.
Just to start, I fully agree with Martin. The times are changing. We are within a new geopolitical situation. There is, on the one side, an incredible level of incidents on what we call hybrid threats. If you go to the website of the Defense Intelligence Agency of the Pentagon, they published 2 weeks ago a report on the level of threats. They analyze and what is the massive amount of cyber attacks, for example, in the network of critical infrastructures, and you realize that something is happening. Most of them sponsored by states, which makes even more complex the response to that, because I believe there is a dilemma on how to better respond to that. From a civil perspective, from a military perspective, is not clear. So this hybrid concept is gaining momentum, I believe, for the bad. At the same time, there is a strategic competition, very much based on technology. This is something that we cannot deny, especially regarding the new US administration. And I think here in Europe, if we want to have, in the European Union, if we want to have competitive advantage, we need to realize that we need to invest more in technology. And to invest more in our own technology, in being competitive in this regard, I think that industry has to work with the whole ecosystem, research centers, universities, and gather momentum as well in order to gain some core expertise in high-end technologies that will provide us more competitive advantage. And third, the word resilience. Resilience for me, linked to the topic of today, the critical infrastructures, is very much based on a concept which is the network of the critical infrastructures that we have in Europe. I believe that the European Union is the territorial piece of the world where we have a more complex, more dense network of infrastructures, physical and digital. The Critical Resilience Directive, Entities Directive, identifies 11 sectors. You name it: transport, energy, healthcare, financial services. The density of this network, and what, for me, what is more interesting, the fact that it is incredibly digitally based today, and it will be in the future, makes that network more vulnerable. The larger, the more complex, the more digitally based, the more vulnerable. And this vulnerability should be tackled, I believe, not at a national scale, not by national entities, but with a common response. So it is more and more a responsibility of the European Union itself, not only to be aware, but to try to define the proper response. And then I come back to the first comment, and I finish. We are now going to decide which are our priorities for putting the EU money in where our mouth is. If we don't realize that this network is going to be more dense, larger, and more vulnerable, then when? So I believe that there is an opportunity to put some of the instruments that we will have in the future into this issue that, for me, is one of the more strategic things that we have nowadays to discuss.
Okay. Thank you, David. We're going to come back to some of these topics in a few minutes, not least the question about the formulation of research and tech strategy to fill some of these needs and gaps. But Irina, let's give you the stage next for your first thoughts on how well prepared we are.
Yes, well, I come from Finland, and in Finland we have this concept called comprehensive security, which is also mentioned by President Sauli Niinistö in his report to the Commission concerning European security. And I'm really an advocate for this comprehensive security because it covers also other types of trends and developments than military defense. And I think we have heard already in the speeches before me that security is indeed a topic that is not only about defense, but it spills over. And especially drivers and developments that cross borders, such as climate change, trade wars, all this geopolitical hassle that is going on. It also touches very much energy, which is a critical infrastructure. On the other hand, this affects the digital sphere as well, and vice versa. Though these are all interdependent, and for the climate change, of course, you could think of various security implications, starting from people having to move up north from southern parts because of the extreme weathers and so forth. But in the context of critical infrastructures, I think what is now essential to understand that because of the climate change, it is imperative to really accelerate the clean transition and start to, we need to also, at the same time, the demand for energy is growing exponentially because of digitalization, and we need to address the climate change, so there needs to be clean energy. And this transition actually does have significant geopolitical consequences, because a shift away from the fossil fuel producers it means that there might be new types of dependencies, for instance, on countries that control the supply chain of critical minerals and hydrogen and all kinds of sources for clean energy. And currently, China is the leader in this field. China is prominent in renewable technology and battery manufacturing. It produces more than 70% of the world's solar modules, and host nearly half of the world's wind turbine manufacturing capacity, and so on and so on. So we can only think what this development might mean for Europe, and how to deal with this, and how does it affect us. So as a conclusion, I would say that there is still work to do in understanding all this and keeping in pace. And since it's so complicated with all the interdependencies, it's not an easy task.
Okay, thank you very much. And also bringing in the climate question, which we often tend to overlook when we talk about stability and security within the European context. Now, Nicholas, last but by no means least, I mean, you have quite a privileged position in Microsoft looking at the implications for cyber, infrastructures, data, and the rest across all kinds of industry sectors. What's your take on the state of the art in Europe today to face the threats that we have?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Great weather, so I know those of you who live in Brussels, this is a very compelling situation to be outside, not inside, so thank you for joining us here today. I'd love to build on what you just said about the comprehensive security piece, because I think that helps us to understand a little bit what kind of transformation we're currently undergoing. Because when we look back 5 or 10 years, security and defense wasn't really looked at from a holistic societal perspective in large chunks of Europe. I mean, you had the luxury of having that foresight, similar discussions in Sweden and the Baltics, but when I look at Central Europe and other parts of the continent, that wasn't really the case. And so what we see now is this rapid shift in also the narrative, and that's why I think the push for preparedness and resilience conversations is actually quite helpful, because it gives us a better understanding. This is not just about military capabilities. This is really about understanding what is each of our responsibility in making sure that our societies, our economies, our political systems, and to be frank, sort of our public discourse as well, when we're adding sort of influence operations and the FEMI part into this, to appreciate what we can all do. For industry stakeholders like me here on stage, this is a fascinating conversation, because suddenly it puts a lot of expectations toward us, and we have to live up also to that expectation, to that responsibility, because it goes way beyond what has been put in place through regulatory means thus far. Like, none of our actions to support the Ukrainian government or the Albanian government or the Moldovan government or other pieces here across Europe that face recent major crises was because we were forced to do. We decided to help out our customers, our partners, to see what we have in our tool set to support them in either defending themselves or recuperating from a massive cyber incident. And that is sort of a new kind of experience for us in figuring out, like, are we still a neutral stakeholder? If we say we're, a customer-obsessed company, what does this mean if our customer base is primarily focused in the Western Hemisphere? When we're tracking more than 600 million attacks per day, and yes, many of those are small, like relatively easy phishing operations, it's still a hell of a lot attacks that we're defending against to make sure that our customers are properly protected. And so just getting that mindset shift really across industry, but really across the different sectors, to understand, hey, here are the expectations we have toward government, because we're not going to be the ones shooting down drones over our data centers. Sovereign airspace remains sovereign airspace. So it's also a question now for governments to understand, where do they need to really cooperate to make sure that those critical infrastructures are properly protected, but of course set expectations to them as well to make sure that they do their homework, defend their networks against cyber intrusions and other pieces, or also identity theft and other pieces, to really make sure that we have a comprehensive understanding of what modern day security and therefore resilience of our critical infrastructures in society really means.
Super. Thank you very much. And I'm delighted that you brought a couple of those last perspectives in, because I think it's the bridge into the next question, which is about this sort of consolidated or more unified European response to a number of these threats. And of course, in Sauli Niinistö's Safer Together report at the end of 2024, one of the things that he proposed as a potential step forward was the establishment of a Securing Europe facility, along with a Defending Europe facility. And that with a view to bringing all of these sort of crisis management, civil security and protection programs, critical infrastructures under a single umbrella, which sounds great on paper, but we are also, within the current Commission's mandate, focused on simplification and streamlining. So I wonder whether you feel that Europe's security agenda would be strengthened by the introduction of something along the lines of a Securing Europe facility, or is it just likely to make life even more complicated for everybody? Perhaps, David, if you'd like to answer first on this one, and then we'll hear what the rest of the panel have to say.
With due respect to the EU institutions, no, I think it is a good point that you make with the Niinistö report. The Draghi report and the Niinistö report are two very nice and interesting, and I would say strategic for the EU wake-up calls. Draghi was focusing on competitiveness, on the gap that there is in the investments that we have done and we need to do in Europe to regain competitiveness, to regain a position in this new world. Niinistö was, in my perspective, focusing on how well prepared are we to tackle with the security environment. And I agree that the fact that he proposes a Securing Europe facility makes sense in two ways. One is because these people in the European Commission have been working a lot in civil security since
20 years.
2008, 2007, more or less. 3-4 billion euros, more or less, introduced in the EU budget for civil security projects. So it's not only about regulation, it's also about the investment that with EU money we have produced in the last 20 years. My impression, and this is a personal opinion, my impression is that we have done this very much focusing on the national mindset. Indeed, when you go and read the Critical Entities Resilience Directive, first is a directive. Second, you need to transpose this directive into the national law. By the way, some states that are talking much then are very slow in transposing the directive.
Thanks for saying that.
But still, it is a national thing. In fact, there is a blueprint that is from the EU Commission in order to push for better coordination of the response. For me, this is not enough. Sorry to say, coordinating the response is not enough. We need to cooperate to anticipate the threat. And cooperating to anticipate the threat means that you are prepared. So in the remit of the Niinistö report, and by the way, this initiative or this proposal on the Securing Europe facility comes into a chapter dedicated to the investment framework. So it provides with a nice guidance to all policymakers to say, listen, we need to streamline the funding instruments that we have. We need to better organize the way we put the money where the needs are. We need to do it from a new way of working, public-private partnerships and private-private partnerships, because in fact, when you talk about the critical infrastructures, most of them are owned by private operators. So when you talk about transport, energy, even financial services, it's private operators who are the responsible, who should be the first responders to this new kind of threats. We, the security industry, are there to provide the solutions as much as we can to these first responders. So I think this partnership, this public-private partnership, private-private partnership, should be the way to put in motion this Securing Europe facility, if adopted, because it is a proposal from a report that is outside the EU mechanics of policy making.
Very good. Now, Martin, I'm going to come to you at the end of this quick round of feedback or comment to give a more consolidated view on what you think might happen next. But let's turn back to you first, Nicholas. I mean, this question of better coordination versus simplification of regulations, taking national context to the pan-European level. I mean, you've referenced the need for more cooperation between governments in terms of crisis anticipation and response. Is the Securing Europe facility going to help? Would it help companies like Microsoft in their engagement with different member states, governments, and other actors in this security and defense landscape?
I think, first of all, the Niinistö report was, I think, extremely helpful to bring a broader awareness to this discussion at large. So just have that publication alongside the Draghi report and just this magic triangle, so to say, and the three big reports was extremely helpful to make sure that people appreciate there is something that we need to address, that there is something that we need to appreciate, and there is sort of a role that we have to play across the board. And so just having pushed that public discourse, I think, was already extremely helpful, because it also took out these conversations from, let's say, the shadows, the fringe issues, and bring them in the mainstream so that people actually appreciate it. This is not just a technical issue. This is really something that is critical, because if we have an extremely insecure, unstable ecosystem, then our economies are not going to thrive, investment is not going to take place. So we need to make sure that that baseline actually exists and is appreciated. How you call this coordination platform and how you label it and structure it, to be honest, I don't think that matters as much as the fact that we need to train more together, we need to practice more together, be it through simulations, exercises, the military calls it wargaming, whatever it may be. But I think we're talking too much and doing too little. And to that point, it's really that if you want to convince stakeholders who traditionally just, did business or whatever it may be, then you need to explain to them what their roles and responsibilities are in certain crises. And what better way to do it than simulating it and saying, hey, just like we have typical firefighters training on a regular basis, you need to appreciate what is your role in a certain crisis situation. Let's make sure you appreciate that. Also, not just knowing what to do, who to call, how to coordinate, having out of that trust building exercise, I think that is critical, and I think that is what we need to do first and foremost, because the structure then will follow. And I think we need to focus on the purpose. What is really the objective? And the objective should be that we are working better together, coordinating together, both prior to incidents, in better detection, early warning systems, but also when we have a situation that we know how to best resolve it quickly.
Very good. Yeah, I think the question of trust is a fundamental one. It's come up in some of our preparatory calls, and as for this question of coordination, I mean, when we talked a couple of days ago, and the European Council had its meeting in Luxembourg about the cyber security crisis management blueprint guidelines and so forth. So it's the Council recommending to themselves on how to coordinate between each other. It's
which is great, fantastic. No, applaud them for doing it. It's wonderful. I think we should see more of that clarification, reducing the gray space, making sure people understand what is their role really across the institutions, but also really across societies at large.
Great. Okay, Irina, let's get your thoughts on this, and then we're going to turn to Martin and bridge from that into the R&D agenda.
So yes, you brought up the issue of trust, and I would like to link this to a kind of more human factor here, because everything we do is dependent on people. And I think that a very, very critical part of building a resilient society is to, and for security as well, is to really cherish our European values and our fundamental rights. And one of those is democracy. And we know that protecting democracy in the digital age is challenging, and it requires a broader view than only the tech itself. And I would say that tech is not only tech, far from it, but it's political. It's everything we do. It's systemic, and that's why we need to think about how algorithms and social media they bring us nice things, obviously, but they also are a means to manipulate how we think, how we vote, how we communicate with other people. They manipulate our opinions. They influence public debates and that can be really damaging for democracy. We have seen examples of this. So we really need to make sure that we are not too dependent on them, and that we understand them, and that there we come to education, to understanding, to a systemic view on how the society can address this. And this doesn't mean that we should only educate more tech people. That we, of course, have to do, obviously, but we need to have understanding of technology, its development, application, implications, possibilities, and risks all over the place in every domain that we can possibly think. And the combination of these understandings can also bring the best results for businesses to advance the transformation, and at the same time they build resilience. And lastly, I would want to bring up that as we speak of this, that okay, people should understand the risks, and that algorithms might be biased and they are untransparent. We have to also remember that we shouldn't take this for granted, but we can do it differently. There are initiatives where open and transparent AI models, language models are developed. There are initiatives where we can actually make a difference in having generative AI where we can detect where the data is coming from, what are the sources, in opposition to closed models that are untransparent. And this is, again, linked to how people in these societies can actually be more resilient and build a better world and strengthen the democracy and our fundamental values.
So there's a very clear component here around skills, awareness, and knowledge, also around the... Yeah, sorry, David, you want to add on this,
I like to underline one concept that I like a lot, which is understanding the technology. Sometimes it seems complex. It's not that complex most of the times. It's an exercise that we need to do, that all the research people, people in centers of excellence, in transfer technology officers, etc., etc. I think there is a duty there in order to make technology more understandable. In any case, for me, I think that technology is essential. I mean, there will be no security in our societies today without technology. And there will be no technology without industry, without the whole ecosystems of those who produce research, who produce development of technologies, startups, all the ecosystem should be involved in producing technology. But for me, again, understanding technology is important. Now, when we talk about data, we talk about the capacity to make a good use of that. Be aware that in the European Union we have the biggest amount of data related to infrastructures in the world. It's not personal data. It's data on smart grids, on air traffic management, on rail systems, and we have an incredible amount of data, not very well structured most of the times. So the quality of data is very important. But in terms to connect these infrastructures, in terms of make this network of infrastructures more resilient, this is going to be fundamental. Now, I give you an example. Indra is one of the main software providers or system providers of air traffic management. We are working in a project with Eurocontrol in order to replace the legacy systems that they had, information systems that were set up 30 or 35 years ago. By the way, we are cooperating with Microsoft. It is an enormous exercise because, in fact, this is a project that was never done. How to do the digital transformation of an entity that is managing the flow of air traffic throughout Europe, which means 37,000 flights a day. And you have to manage that network. And the network is airports, is airlines, is air navigation service providers, is all the information coming from the meteorological entities. It's plenty, millions, that, I don't know how to say the scale of data that we have to manage, or the network has to manage, in order to fulfill a service that means that you, the traveler, arrive on time to your destination, and in safety.
Great. I wish we had
Quite
a
a
whole
challenge.
session to do on
We
the
need to
transport
secure this
dimension.
infrastructure as well.
Yeah,
We need
absolutely.
to secure this infrastructure.
Well, that's a great bridge, actually, to Martin. Right? So we're not going to put you on the spot necessarily about your professional or personal views on the Securing Europe facility, but in your unit and with other colleagues in the Commission, you somehow have to translate this complexity into some kind of coherent, well-designed, forward-looking strategy for research and development and innovation. You have one vertical in Horizon Europe, Civil Security Cluster, but there are many other instruments and platforms which are also supporting this. So how do you approach that challenge, right? And how could you possibly do it better in future? When you look ahead to the next MFF, for example, and the potential new instruments coming through, what would help us get a more effective, impactful agenda for R&D and innovation for security moving forward?
Yeah, thank you, Simon, for the question. So indeed, I will not speculate about the structure of the next MFF. I think I can go as far as to say, to reassure you that security will be an important element of it, including security research. But there will be a structural, work to be done. I mean, as you say, there is on the one side, vertically, we have our little program on civil security applications, and we focus on things such as fighting crime and terrorism, border management, critical infrastructure protection, disaster resilience. However, those sub-programs are organized. What's very important is that we get the right stakeholder input. So I think normally in the Commission we're quite good at creating structures that provide input to these kind of documents, like our work programs. So again, here is a public-private partnership kind of perspective to it. The important institutional actors, for example, we have Europol, we have Frontex in our fields. In cyber, in infrastructure protection, it's a bit more kind of dynamic in terms of, let's say, the landscape of institutions. But so the point is organizing the stakeholder input to how these programs are organized. So there's a vertical element to it, and then there's a horizontal element to it. And I think that circles back to what we discussed at the beginning with awareness and with mainstreaming security across different policy fields and merging different objectives. Just to take a far-fetched example, some of my colleagues are discussing this afternoon the European Bauhaus, new European Bauhaus initiative. So a new, green, pleasant, human-centered approach to the built environment in Europe. And so, can we, do we have the latitude, do we have the bandwidth to marry different objectives in the same action? Can we build green, new, people-centered public spaces, which are also resilient against disasters and hazards, be they natural or be they man-made? So it is very much about pursuing several objectives at the same time. And then I would also like to come back to how can we have the biggest impact of what we do in terms of research. Indeed, we cannot stop at whatever TRL 6 or 7 at the end of a project and just kind of wish that there is an afterlife to a project. The way we approach this is that we make it mandatory for what we call practitioners to be part of the research projects. For us, this means we have first responders, We have police authorities, forensic institutes, border guard authorities, Coast Guard authorities. They're integral parts of the technology development to make sure that, because at the end of the day, they will be the ones that use the technology, and operators of critical infrastructures, which more often than not are private sector operators. So to make sure that what comes out of the research investment actually fits with the market and fits with the requirements of the users. There is also more that can be done in terms of public procurement of innovation, pre-commercial procurement, getting the demand side, integrating the demand side more into the tech development. And then just to give a short shout outs to some of the things that have been said before. Strategic autonomy, of course, in a way it's the discussion from 2 years ago, but it's still very much important for our resilience. Big critical infrastructure operators need to be aware of their supply chains, the vulnerabilities in their supply chains. And these vulnerabilities can be technical, they can be physical, and they can be human. In terms of manufacturing, IT system development, we might not build all important sensitive systems within Europe, but we need to be in a position to evaluate the security of the components which we source from outside Europe. And we need to have a resilient supply chain in order to not make us vulnerable to blackmail. Also, shout out to Nicolas. I think so. The EU, what we've done, and we've done it for a while, we fund technological development. We can always do better in terms of the impact and kind of the deployment. But so there is funding. The regulatory side has very much kind of evolved and is quite mature, I would say. For example, again, I mentioned the NIS2 directive, but the operational cooperation sometimes lags behind. And it's a sectoral point. So on the military side, of course, the military knows how to cooperate together operationally. Police forces in our field, they know very much how to cooperate together. But the cross-border element of it and the cross-sectoral element of this cooperation, that's where we need to get better.
Okay.
And the human factor, indeed, is sometimes if we manage to educate people about resilience, about risks, then we will be definitely better off than we're now.
Super. Thank you, Martin. Now, we're going to have time for a couple of questions, so I'm going to open the floor to you in just one moment. But before we do, get the thought processes working. Nicholas, before we convene today, you also referenced a really interesting study, the baseline report that Microsoft did on security and defense, looking at some of these individual sector exposures and vulnerabilities. Do you want to say a very quick word on that? Because it takes a more sort of vertical view of individual sectors, but it seems to be the kind of insights that would be very useful for people like Martin and colleagues to think about this in a more cross-sectoral view, certainly through the lens of cybersecurity or digital security.
Yeah, sure. Very short plug. And I have to say, we're not the only vendor that do these kinds of reports. So if you want a more holistic understanding of what the different stakeholders see, please compare, contrast. Our visibility and our understanding is, of course, only based on our telemetry. So I just wanted to make sure that this is the disclaimer, because even though we have a lot of visibility, it's never a complete picture. So for the sake of science in the room, let's make sure that you have a critical view whenever you review any kind of report from literally anybody, including ENISA. But putting it out of the way, really quickly, I think what is important for us to appreciate and understand is where are the attackers putting most attention to. And that goes from cyber criminals, from nation-state acts, from other malicious actors. And what we see, unfortunately, is there's a doubling down on any kind of supply chain actor. So that's certainly a sector that is at severe risk because it is perceived as a multiplier for multiple entries across the different industries. We see a doubling down on both academia, civil society, and NGOs, because quite often they are actually at a soft entry point toward information and intelligence around government-affiliated entities. So while they think, hey, we're just doing nice reports, unfortunately, quite often this is an interesting entry point for them. And then the last point that I wanted to make, which is actually applicable across many different sectors, is what we've noticed is quite often, now we have the awareness, people say, oh, we need to invest, we need to do something, we need to build up our digital transformation. But a transformation eventually stops, right? Once you're a butterfly, you look beautiful and you fly and you're done. But unfortunately, what we're looking at is not just the transformation, but really building up capabilities. And this is certainly something that really requires continuous activity. You know, you're not just gonna transform and then you're almighty and powerful. You need to appreciate and understand what you need to do on a continuous basis to figure out how to improve your networks, how to skill up your employees, how to be sort of at your best on a continuous basis, because unfortunately, this threat landscape is innovating really, really quickly, and so you can't just stop there, and that's actually a plea for members of board of directors who may give their CISOs a certain amount of money and say, okay, this is your budget, you can do whatever you want, but you won't get any more. There needs to be a certain continuous appreciation that this is really an evolving ecosystem, that people need to have stability to really think through how to best build up capabilities across the board, across the sectors for their industries or whatever stakeholders they represent.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, we have one at the front from the line and the second one. So we'll take quick questions or comments from you. Microphone's arriving.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm live. My name is Ronald de Bruin. I'm director of the COST Association, so basically involved in research and networking. In a past life, and I talk about the period between 2005 and 2010, I've been heavily involved in setting up and managing ENISA. I heard ENISA. And the experience I'm having now is that I'm back, into the future in a time capsule, because I'm just listening to the same kind of conversations as I was listening into back then. The only difference is that there's an exploration of the trend. Things are getting more complex, more interdependent, and so forth and so forth. So I'm just trying to understand, okay, so what is the question posed here and what is the answer? Are we ready? The complexity is so, manifest that with a theoretical exercise, you're not going to get a grasp. You can make an attempt. I think that the only solution to really, let's say, pave the way forward is by jointly organizing exercises and then take the learnings and then step. Because otherwise it remains very much a game of working in silos and then trying to do something transversal on paper. So I think it's time for the exercises, and then you will find out how resilient you are. Then you find out where the interdependencies are. Then you find out where you need to reinforce. So the proof of the pudding, I think, is in the eating.
Okay, thank you, Ronald. So if you'd like to pass to our
the question
colleague
is,
here at the
do
front.
you feel the same? Okay.
Okay. Or if we need to shift to secure gaming instead of war gaming. Okay. Anyway,
Well,
just
thank
introduce yourself and then a short
Yes,
question.
yes. My name is Doreen Rookmaker. I'm the managing director of Nivomo, which is an innovative company, a rail company. Before I was an MEP at the European Parliament, and before that I was for a long time a risk manager. And I would like to ask the question, I think indeed, as Nicholas told us, testing and training is very important if you want to become resilient. And I think with the European Commission treating society as a sort of parent by caring for us and taking responsibility from us by introducing rules and regulations, we make society less resilient instead of more. I think we have to, if we want to grow to a society, we have to give people more responsibility and not less. And by giving them money and regulations and protections and taking up the bill if something goes wrong, we become less resilient. This is a question for the Commission.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask for quite punchy, short comments in response to this. The conversation can continue later. Perhaps, Martin, if you'd like to respond to the first one, and then for the others, any thoughts that you have on this idea of perhaps more bottom-up approaches, but also this idea of more cross-sectoral testing, piloting, experimentation, and how we take the learnings for that and plug it into policy. Martin, you first.
Good. Well, listen, the good news for you is that simplification is very high on the agenda for us right now. So wherever you feel that there's too much responsibility taken away, I think now is really a window of opportunity to look at all the regulations to see what can be done better. But I would want to disagree with most of what you said. For example, in the NIS2 directive, the change from the first to the second directive was exactly making the board of companies responsible for their IT security stance, not leaving it to the tech guys in a, lower down the food chain, making the top of the companies responsible legally. I think that is not taking away responsibility. And I had a chat with somebody working in the energy sector with gas-fired power plants, and he said, this is very old infrastructure, it's very complex, it's legacy. Without the European, so it's very difficult to be in compliance with regulations, very difficult and costly to have a cybersecurity stance for this type of infrastructures. Without the European regulation, they wouldn't even have tried. Now at least they tried.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Final comments from David.
I would like to again underline this last thing. I think this is very important. That sometimes we see regulation as red carpet and just bureaucracy and eurocracy. These eurocrats in Brussels that want us to squeeze our lives because they just produce paper but sometimes this regulation is good. Sometimes it is necessary in order to promote a more coherent vision of the challenges, to be better prepared, to receive the incentive not only from a financial perspective but also to listen, guys, you need to do that because otherwise there will be problems. Again, the energy grids. I'm from Spain. We had a blackout 2 weeks ago for 24 hours. 24 hours, imagine people in a train in the middle of nowhere with no electricity for 24 hours. What is the cause of that? Maybe it's multiple. But my feeling is that there is an issue with the capacity of the network itself, because we are introducing a lot of new renewable energies, we are introducing a lot of input into the network, and the network has a certain capacity, and what we need is to comply with potentially the regulation that we are, I don't know if we are complying or not, but we will need to comply in the future. So again, the concept of preparedness, regulation stimulates the concept of preparedness. This is how I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's very important what Martin said.
Okay, thank you. Now, with apologies to Irina and to Nicholas, I'm getting the signals that we need to draw this session to a close, but I hope you'll be staying around, and Ronald, you can get your question thrown out into the coffee break and other discussions later on today. But first, please join me in thanking Martin, David, Irina, and Nicholas for their time and all of their insights today.
We're going to move the needle a bit, and we're going to talk about dual use research and dual use technologies. There have been a lot of announcements recently, and some budgets are unlocking around Europe. So we'll take a look at whether Europe is ready to embark on the dual-use journey, whether it's on wishful thinking or if we're actually going to see some of the initiatives on the table materialize into real life technology development. And for this, we're going to kick off this session with a Q&A with Robert de Groot, who is Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Robert, thank you for joining us. We'll start the two of us. Take a seat. Yeah, here.
Okay.
Stay in the middle. It's only the two of us for just a few minutes, and then I'll call the others up. Thank you for joining us, because the EIB has been very active around this topic of dual use, right? And
yes.
I understand that it's a topic that is close to your heart, right? So tell us, how does the EIB come in this geometry, and how can it? There has been an announcement that some money has been unlocked for dual use, startups in particular, and SMEs, right? And so, how can the EIB really contribute to delivering this defense strategy and boosting defense capabilities in Europe?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It was the leaders in Europe, the prime ministers and presidents, who asked the EIB, please do something in the area of security and defense. They did so early 2024, and at three distinctive moments, we have adapted our policies to also include security and defense. And if I may say so, one of the changes is we don't use the word dual anymore. We have dropped it.
What are we using?
We are using investments in security and defense, even directly for ministries of defense, except for weapons and ammunition. We are an investment bank, so we invest in technology and innovation, and ministries of defense need a lot of technology and innovation, and that part of what they need is also now an area where we like to work.
Very good. So you've taken a road tour recently to exchange with national defense ministers, right? So what has been your takeaways from these discussions, and have you identified clear investment gaps where the EIB can complement national efforts in the field of defense, defense technology, defense research?
First, about my tour in Europe.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many surprised generals in the ministries of defense who were forced to talk to a banker. They had not done so for decades, which is also a sign, I believe, of the underinvestment in security and defense we have seen in Europe for historical reasons. But if we go back in history to the peace treaties in the past centuries, peace treaties were always conducted by the military and bankers. And this tandem we have to re-establish today, and the people in the military and the ministries of defense and the bankers have to get used to also to talk to people from commercial banks and pension funds and insurers and investment banks like the EIB to say how we can collectively finance what is needed for Europe's autonomy, for our security, but also for our resilience when it comes to threats from outside. So these talks have been very interesting for us as bankers to learn from what the generals need in Europe, and also for them to understand what financing something they need in fact entails. So we have now carved out 4 areas where we are going to be very active. One is a traditional one, which has to do with infrastructure, building the roads and bridges, military hospitals, barracks, combat support centers, which is needed in case of a crisis. The second one is research and development and innovation, because the things we need and might need tomorrow still need to be developed by startups and scale-ups and the bigger European primes, so that requires research money. Then we're going to do something specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises, because they have difficulty accessing credit. And maybe yesterday you saw in the news that we have signed a 500 million loan with Deutsche Bank to pass on to SMEs throughout Europe. And the final sector we try to cover is manufacturing, because we want to increase the manufacturing capacity in Europe, strengthen the industrial base, so that we are more autonomous when we want to be able to build and produce and fabricate and manufacture the things we need for our security, which is not only military, it's also antibiotics, for example. And COVID has shown us that if there's a real crisis and we don't get any antibiotics because they're produced elsewhere in the world, we could have a big problem. So this is also part of securing Europe and our citizens to invest in something. People always focus on defense, but there's much more to our security than just defense.
All right, let's talk instruments for a minute. So there is so the Strategic European Security Initiative is this vehicle, or was, you're going to have to explain us, this vehicle to channel investments for dual use, that is no longer dual use technology money. And there was a cap at 8 billion euros, right, that no longer stands, from what I understand. Again, explain
Exactly.
us. Well, maybe start by explaining us the initiative,
No,
and then I get to
we
the
had already since 2022 a special program for security and defense. We decided to stop the special program and the 8 billion attached to it, and fully integrate security and defense in what the EIB does, which is energy and climate related and innovation and batteries, etc. So it's now part and parcel of the public policy goals we have in place throughout the bank. The 8 billion cap has gone off because we are now going to look at it on a year-to-year basis, and the budget we are getting and what we reserve for every sector of the economy is decided upon by the shareholders, which are the ministers of finance of the 27.
All right. But 7 months ago, we were here, where we were in a conference around defense, a science business conference. And there we heard that out of the 8 billions that there were at the time, only 2 billions had found takers as investments, as fresh capital. So do you think this time around, with this new setup, there would be more takers?
Absolutely, I see it happening. We had a turnover in this sector of 500 million in 2023, 1 billion in 2024.
Okay.
We had reserved 2.5 billion for this year, 2025, but I can see already this going up to at least 3.5 billion. So I think it's going to continue to grow. Demand for our products was very slow in 2023 and 4, but now it's picking up because also the national administrations of the member states are increasing their volumes, and they will take a decision on that in 2 weeks' time at the NATO summit. So I expect, although the administrations are not extremely fast, but in due course, I think they will come up with more programs. And it's not only the EIB who finances. Is the fact that the EIB led the way on financing actually brought in the commercial banks. That's why we signed with the Deutsche Bank as the first pan-European bank, and more are going to come. And it's brought in pension funds and insurers. So you can also see the private sector coming in with large amounts of money. Let's not forget the venture capital funds.
Right, so there is this leveraging effect,
Absolutely.
this spillover effect. Are there any particular technologies that you see particularly in need for investment? Do you see where is the demand coming
Well,
from?
the demand is very much in the area of space, because we don't have European autonomy in the area of space, whether it's communications or optics or photography, or there's no European cloud. We need to be more active in the area of AI, of data centers where we can securely storage our images from satellites so that we are independent from any other power. So I think in the next couple of years this is going to require a lot of investment. And then there's the small things. We have to protect our civilian hospitals, because we can see from the Ukraine that the Russians don't care. They bomb a civilian hospital as easily as a military one. So our civil infrastructure, whether it's energy or water or hospitals, need protection too. Our seabed infrastructure, Baltic Sea, North Sea, Mediterranean, needs to be protected. This all requires innovation and technology.
Very good, and we've heard some of this during the first session. So thank you. We'll come back to some of the points and some of the important areas that you mentioned, sectors, technologies, ways to finance, spillover effects. But to do so, I'd like to invite the other three panelists on stage. Please come up and I'll introduce you when you're seated. So Ethan Corbin, who is the director of the Defense and Security Committee at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Next to you, a familiar face in our little Babon Manuel Elec show, cabinet expert is part of the cabinet of Commissioner Zahareva at the European Commission. Thank you for joining us as well. And the other colorful woman, Verena Fenneman. So she's the head of the EU Brussels office for Fraunhofer. Very good. So let's keep going with this dual-use research and dual-use technology, or no longer dual-use panel. And maybe, Ethan, actually, I'll start with you, because you're a little bit of the outsider here. You're coming with a US perspective, right? And, well, a NATO perspective, but also a transatlantic perspective. And in fact, it's interesting. I mean, we'd welcome your view on how European is reshuffling the cards a bit and is investing into this dual-use journey, right? So from your perspective, is Europe on the right track? Can you compare with what has happened in the US, well, decades ago, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I am an outsider, but I'm also transatlantic. It's sort of European. I'm married to a European, etc. I have a European family, so. But I'm happy to do this. So first of all, I want to start by saying it's interesting to see from a U.S. perspective what's happening in Europe. And if you listen to, sort of first, congratulations in a way, because you've earned praise now. So you've gone from a lot of skepticism and a lot of rhetoric that was perhaps damaging for European ears about the lack of readiness, etc. at the beginning of the Trump administration, wherein the Secretary of Defense says Uncle Sam will not be Uncle Sucker in February, and you've moved to being the example, right? The Shangri-La Dialogue, the example of European action, getting more ready, and actually taking the steps forward, and that is, in fact, pretty true to a degree, at least on paper, as we've been discussing at this point. And I would say that from an American perspective, however, I would say there are still significant hurdles to achieving that, right? And I think those are areas that we are quite familiar with in this group. You're folks who are quite involved in either the academic or the business, et cetera, spheres in this area. Those are the fact that Europe remains a very fragmented market. It remains significantly underfunded when it comes to the access to venture capital. Europeans' focus and the ability to garner investment is on a matter of 10 to 20-fold less than American abilities to access capital for startups, et cetera. But perhaps I would say the biggest difference when you think about AI or with space, those are sort of key areas that we've been talking about right now, and the idea of dual uses is one is that when you get a sense, when you talk to Europeans, is that a dual use comes across almost as a dirty word. Oh, are you going to be talking, is that going to be in defense sector? Well, okay, that's, first of all, that shows a strategic outlook that differs entirely from the United States. The difference in geopolitics and strategy for the United States would be that they view AI and they view space, et cetera, as something for strategic, great power competition. Europeans still view it for research and academic purposes, and to a degree commercial, but not as much. And I can go into some more examples from the Cold War, because I think they're quite instructive for us. about how the United States also was in a similar position to Europe in the wake of World War II, but actually took some very serious galvanizing steps in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which I think could be instructive for this conversation. I can stop here now, and we can go into it.
But I actually have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Do you think that the US is a step ahead when it comes to technologies like quantum, AI, or space, because there were no restrictions between military applications and civilian applications?
I do. It's a very easy answer, because the United States is willing to put, so let me give you an example about space, okay? So what are some of the problems with space? I put them down for you. Heavy lift capacity, you're behind in reusable rockets, the idea about infrastructure within space and on the ground infrastructure from launch capacity, radar sensoring, et cetera, that's all sort of behind. Why? Again, it comes back to underfunding. These are critical areas for moving it forward. The ESA budget is $7.8 billion. I had to look at before I came here. NASA is $28 billion, and then the US Space Force is another $29 billion. This dwarfs the ability, it unleashes a lot of potential. In addition to that, I would say there's an attitude towards it, and I've heard this in the first panel, which I find interesting. Europeans, and I have these discussions a lot, and particularly right now, because there's a lot of anxiety and sort of identity crises going on. If you go to headquarters, et cetera, where are we right now at the European moment? Are still very risk adverse, right? And so that will pull back the idea of unleashing innovation. And I think the United States recognizes, and we recognize this during World War II, recognized it during the Cold War, is that unleashing the innovative technological and research edge, or scientific research edge, is the way to do it. And you have to harness brain power, you have to harness the funding to do it, and you have to create very dynamic ecospheres to do that. The more you regulate, and the more you have something, if you're risk prone, that stifles innovation. And let me give you an example. Cost of complying with Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, is about $150,000 for a private company, about $1 million for a public company. That's interesting. The GDPR is even more expensive, okay? This all holds back things like AI innovation, it holds back missile technologies, it holds back space capability innovation, because regulations force companies to reduce data storage and processing, right? It gives the United States a huge advantage as far as that goes. And you see it even within the United States. Take a look at the big techs. You don't have big tech in Europe, basically. You have smaller tech. And I'm not saying this in any way being arrogant, because I have my own problems with the way we are doing things right now, and particularly sometimes the messaging is tough. But I would say that the first mover advantage in this field in particular is quite important. And the example is, if you look at OpenAI, or you look at Google, you look at the other big companies right now, Apple is falling behind. Why? Because it botched its output of AI and its use of AI. It has not been able to deliver quickly enough, and that lack of being able to get ahead of the wave is actually pulling it back faster than we realize, to the point where we're now worried, will Apple become the next Nokia?
All right. So let's go back to what Europe is trying to do. Yeah. Right? Gentlemen, I'm looking at you in particular, because the EIB has announced efforts. The Commission has announced efforts, and there is like a tangible amount of money that has been unlocked to the European Innovation Council, right? So is there a momentum going? What are we likely to achieve in the, say, next couple of years, maybe? Or how is allowing military applications to EU-supported disruptive innovation going to actually contribute to Europe's competitiveness, like now the famous impact? What is the magic formula?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. The first thing that I would say is that I think Ethan's analysis is very lucid, and as you were listing some of the shortcomings that we have and some of the challenges that we have, I was sort of going through my mind through the Draghi report, which in a way mirrors very much your analysis and deepens it and looks into individual sectors, etc. So I think we have today a pretty good diagnosis of what what it is. I wouldn't say what we are doing wrong. I think what we are confronted with as challenges. I give you one example. One of the things that I like about the Draghi report is the way that they show the comparison between R&D investment in Europe and in the United States. And the main difference is not so much the levels are also different, but it's also the fragmentation that you also mentioned, and the fact that public funding is dispersed. It is uncoordinated. Our federal funding is 10% of R&D funding, which is essentially Horizon and some other bits and pieces. So we more than the actual level of funding, we have a problem of coordination of funding, and we have that as a challenge, especially when we look at our external competitiveness. Of course, it's completely different if we were all isolated and all European countries were competing with each other, but that's not the case, and we know that perfectly well. Other issues that Ethan touched upon, such as the low level of VC capacity in Europe and the excessive regulation in different areas, these are all things that we are actively looking at. And just 2 weeks ago, we adopted the startup and scale-up strategy, which is exactly...
Where there is an instrument specifically for defense, right?
Indeed. So we were carrying out this in-depth analysis, in particular in what regards scaling up. Although the analysis is about startups and scale-ups, but scaling up is our main challenge. It's not so much startups, where Europe is quite prolific, in fact. Indeed, dual use and defense is also one aspect that we are looking into. And here the question is, today, in our current framework program for research, the way we interpret it is that dual use is not allowed. Now, this is something which is obviously questioned by, for example, the ATOR report that has recommendations for the next program points out very clearly that this is a shortcoming. So obviously, I don't think anybody in the Commission disputes that this is something that we have to look into for the future, how dual use could be dealt with in a future research program, but even going a step further. In fact, this we are already doing, because we have a legislative modification for the EIC accelerator, which is now being examined by the Council and the Parliament. But we are also going a little bit further. And we are asking ourselves, well, we should not just look at dual use within the civilian research program. We should look into how the civilian and the European defense research programs should interact better. For example, having better mechanisms for spinning in and spinning out civilian developments into military research and vice versa. And this is something that we are also not very good at doing yet. We have some first steps. We have a UDIS program now, which is about spinning into military research, but I think we have to improve our mechanisms for the future. So we are definitely looking at all of these aspects.
Manuel, since you have the floor and you're already speaking about what should happen in the future, what will happen in the future?
Well, we are, of course, I can't tell you how the future program is going to look like, but I can tell you that we have a lot of material for reflection. I mentioned the Draghi report, the Letter report, the ATOR report, and we have lots of discussions with stakeholders, and the science business also gives us a lot to think about. So
that's them.
We have, exactly, I'm looking at Florian in particular. So we have a lot of material and a lot of contributions, and I'm not just saying this, it's really important because we do have consistent messages from our stakeholders that are not position papers from last week. These are reasoned opinions over the decades and over decades of experience in research funding. And I think this is extremely important.
But you really cannot tell us anything about FP10. I mean, there's a legislation, so of course that won't be easy to change, but
what can you extract? What can you extract today? Yes, I can tell you something. I can tell you that I can tell you that there will be a standalone program, which is very important. You've heard that, so that's not news. So we will have a standalone program. I think it is to me without dispute that we need to have a stronger program. And what do I mean by this? I think it's very important for us to recognize that the content of the program and the instruments of the program are not indifferent to the size of the program. That is, I don't think, and for example, Christian Ehler constantly says this, and I think he's absolutely right, I don't think that we can conceptualize a research funding program and then cut the budget to size. I don't think that this is a good idea. I think it's one thing if you have a budget of 50 million, you can have a certain type of program. If you have a budget of 100 million, you can have another type of program. And if you have 200 million, you have a different approach. I don't think this is about shrinking or enlarging the budget to the same kinds of instruments. So specifically, what do I mean by this? I think it's beyond dispute that we need to continue investing in fundamental science in excellent instruments that we have, which are brand names such as the ERC or Marie Skłodowska-Curie. So this, for me, is beyond dispute. The question is, how further do we want to go? Into collaborative research, into supporting innovation, into supporting scaling up and mobilizing private investment, which, by the way, is the big distance between us and the US in terms of research funding, is in mobilizing private investment. So that, for me, is the question at the moment, is what will be our level of ambition for the framework program, and how that will shape the choice of instruments and the toolbox that we will have at our disposal. So I think the President has said this already several times. We need to be ambitious. We need to have a self-standing program that invests strongly in research, that invests strongly in the EIC also. She has said this very clearly. How far can we go? We are working on it at the moment.
Okay, so you won't tell us anything about a defense cluster in Pillar 2?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, let's look at research, should we? At what's going on now. And in fact, we'll use that to feed maybe recommendations or really practical points that policymakers need to take on board for those in the labs. Right? So Fraunhofer has been conducting military research for a while now, right?
Yes.
So how does that work? I mean, military research is financed or it's funded through the European Defence Fund, while civilian research through Horizon. So is there any bridge possible in your head?
So yes, maybe I need to explain a little bit for those who may not really know about Fraunhofer structure. So actually we do have 74 institutes all dealing with different topics. And of course we are dealing with military research already since 1956 or so. So for us it's definitely not new to combine the civilian and the military side.
But is it combined or is it run separately?
It depends. I mean, it's really like we do have a few institutes which are funded by the MOD, the National Ministry of Defense, and we do have another few institutes, let's say, who are more funded by the Research Ministry, and you cannot tell that we are keeping it completely separately, because of course you do have researchers who are working in both spheres, let's say. So I think we have to really look down to the single researcher. Of course, if a researcher wants to do projects in the EDF, they have to undergo all these clearance, and the institutes do have to have more security and whatever to fulfill all these framework conditions that the EDF brings. But let's say the institutes who want to do the military research, they are prepared for it, and then it really depends on the specific researcher if they want to do it and if they get clearance and all these things.
So let's say that in the future the Commission looks at create more synergies between the framework program and the European Defence Fund. speculation. What should they look at? What are those barriers that should come off in order to allow these synergies?
So from our perspective, we would like to call it challenges and not barriers, because we see that there are definitely options and possibilities to create synergies, but you cannot just say there is a huge potential and then off we go. I think it also, to talk to you, maybe and you should know, of course, that it comes a lot down to the processes as we have it now with the different programs with their specific framework conditions. You really have to see what the processes are. For example, if you do, as I mentioned already, if you do EDF projects, you need clearances, you need security standards, you need to talk to your ministry, also Ministry of Defense, depending on, don't want to go too much into details. It's a lot of framework conditions, and we have to really look at how we bring them together. I think it's not, let's say personally, I think you cannot just combine those. You may, first of all, have to define what type of technologies are we talking about. You cannot just say we merge those two programs and then everything seems to be dual use option, but really define which technologies are we talking about. What TRL level are we talking about? Because the dual use potential may be bigger when it comes to lower TRL than if you have also already a technology which is developed quite far. Then, of course, you have chosen already one path, either the civilian or the military. So defining these, then checking really the what security levels you need. What will we do with associated countries, for example? So far, some countries are excluded from certain topics. Do we want to keep them inside? Do we want to be as open as we are now, or will we have to restrict even more on that? What will they say? I mean, we know already that there are a few associated countries say, if we open it up to more dual use, we may even lose our options to participate in programs. So they will come in this discussion as well. Then we need to, when it comes to the participants of the program, we need to make sure that, for example, academia, who is not yet in, I can tell from Germany, we do have universities who have clauses that they only do civilian research. So, of course, if in the future there is more potential for dual use research, they need to be, first of all, they need to change their mindset. It's very German, but maybe also in other countries, I don't know, but the mindset, and then secondly, if they have done only Horizon Europe projects, for example, so far, they need to understand what they have to fulfill in the next step. As I said, we are doing it for 70 years now. For us, it's not a problem, but we learned a lot in these decades.
Okay.
So it's quite, when it comes to narrow it down to your question, is a lot of the processes we have to think about. I'm at the very beginning when I heard, sorry, I mean, I'm very blunt here, but when I heard all the politicians talking about, there is so much dual use potential, I was saying, yes, but who has ever looked into the processes down to earth as it is now? We cannot bring them easily together.
So we need a pragmatic approach.
Definitely.
Any reactions? Are there things that the Commission are thinking about? Are there questions that you're facing when talking to the national ministries? Ethan, the NATO also has some instruments on its own, right? And there have been also some joint initiative with the European Investment Fund as well. So are they all questions that is on your list of priorities to deal with? And then I'll open up for questions.
Shall I start off?
Please.
I have three S's, in fact. The first one is indeed to simplify as much as possible to allow for the security and defense sector to profit from everything which is out there. The second S is we have to standardize. We have too many suppliers in Europe, and we have to collectively decide how to standardize. And the third one, which is the most difficult one to deal with, is we have to scale up. We have to scale up to be able to have production at a lower cost instead of a fragmented production in 27 individual defense markets, because let's not forget there is no internal market for security and defense goods. It doesn't exist. There is no capital market inside the EU. Investors would love to invest in Europe, but they have to deal with 27 different regulations. If they go to the US, they only have to deal with one. I'm not quite sure Europe is that risk averse, because if we were, we would not invest massively in venture capital in the US. I think it's a regulatory thing. So these three S's are my way forward.
Okay. Additional comments?
Me? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I take that because the Euro-Atlantic trade is quite undervalued. It's about 35% of global trade, and in fact, the cross-pollination in the defense sector is quite deep, and we know that from visiting defense industry all over. But I mean, I think for me, you need to look at a few things that would unleash the potential of Europe, and if Europe wants to work together as a whole to do so. And that means, not being afraid of risk. Sorry, I know that you think I identified that incorrectly, but I still think that when you regulate first, then you do stifle innovation. So I think the United States has a tendency to regulate after. But what I would like to think about is that when EU and NATO cooperate together, for example, they do try and break down some of the barriers, but they also look at broader issues. So you look at military mobility, look at infrastructure investments. These are things that are completely irrelevant. These were very key to success in the Cold War, but also is the idea for the United States about expanding U.S. power extraction capacity in its own country. In addition to that, to get ahead, and they viewed it as an existential race, Europe needs to decide if it's an existential race to stay relevant, and therefore to unleash, you need to do something along the lines about what the US did, for example, which was the Emergency Defense Education Act in the 1950s, which put trillions of dollars into education, funded a network of labs and research from applied research, etc., National Science Foundation, Atomic Energy, and it allowed there to be across the United States a network of innovation hubs that essentially brought up the full economic potential of the United States. And so what I mean by this sort of thing is that I think when I talk to Europeans, they fear a little bit of the guns and butter dynamic. All right, if we invest more in weapons, it's going to trade off in social programs, which we've become very, very attached to. Well, I would say actually the evidence is the exact opposite of that. It wasn't a zero-sum game. That was the Soviet Union. In the United States, the amount of growth, the amount of income inequality and disparity reduced the most when the United States was investing the most in its defense industry and unleashing brain power, creating networks between the government, business, and university, and it was allowing for broad-based infrastructural projects to become part of that defense imperative. So if Europe wants to achieve that, that's a big-scale project, but to my mind, and if you look at the history, it pays dividends. The European defense industrial base right now, output is about 160 billion per year, combined. The United States is about 320. If you unleash these potentials, you could double, triple, quadruple that, I think, by 2035 very easily.
All right. Bernard?
So maybe just 2 points that I think are also important to point out. One is that we do have, now thinking about civilian research more than defense, we do have a very high level of public investment, or a reasonably high level of public investment. Again, that is not so much for me the issue. The issue is private investment and to increase and to leverage private investment. And as Robert pointed out, there's a lot of VC investment which is done by European actors in the United States. So I think that is for me an incredibly important reality to address. And the issue of the fragmentation of public investment, because one of the things that we try to do through European programs is precisely to focus priorities. Now, some in this room will tell me, well, you're very unsuccessful at doing so, because things tend to, spiral a little bit out of control. And I think this is an important lesson that we have to look at, and we have to make some important choices in terms of choosing priorities and focusing efforts. Now, I think that there's also a certain merit and a certain benefit in having a certain level of fragmentation. That is, I think, to have different national programs and different national actors, I think, is a richness that Europe does benefit from, especially in our educational system, etc. But we do have to make some hard choices and to decide what are those critical technologies that we want to invest in together and where we want to scale up as practically as a continent in order to ensure our international competitiveness. And there are areas and there are industries where we are world leaders today. But what about tomorrow? So this is, I can give you one example, the aircraft industry. We are today leaders. 95% of an aircraft is produced from design to taking off in Europe, but this is today. And how long can you keep this industrial leadership going?
Or how do you
and
get to 100%?
Who will be producing the airplane of the future, whether it's powered by hydrogen or by something else that we don't know yet? And these are the kinds of decisions that I think we have to start looking into seriously.
I could challenge you on the richness from fragmentation. No?
Well, diversity. Let's call it diversity.
May I make a comment?
Please.
To that? I totally understand that now also with the discussion about budgets and how much budget we can have and fragmentation, I understand that we have to a certain level to prioritize. On the other hand, we strongly advise, and this is a mechanism. I'm very much looking forward to see how the FP10 will look like, is the mechanism how on the one hand you want to prioritize and on the other hand to keep a research pipeline for the next and the after the next innovation, no matter if it's aircraft or whatever technology. It's that we don't lose that by prioritizing too much. I understand we do a lot. We have I don't know 6 clusters in Pillar 2, plus the fundamental research, plus the EIC, plus bottom-up calls, whatever. So it's a lot of different technologies we are looking at. But we should not forget that we keep the pipeline as open as possible also, and maybe not only in terms of fundamental research, but also in terms of the applied research where we bring technologies even further down the innovation value chain, and where we might see that at the end we get solutions that are not working, and we have to go back to fundamental research. So it's like a cycle. Sometimes I feel like we think like we focus a little bit more on ERC, EIC funding because it's between the two poles, but we are missing out a little bit on how much is needed, how much time is needed research-wise, also in what we call now Pillar 2, but in the applied research together with the industry, and where they say even incremental developments are good for the industry as a whole. So it's just a little bit my concern that we might lose about prioritization, we might lose the long-term thinking.
And the whole cycle and the comprehensive approach. Questions? Yeah. 1, 2. We've got one here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Linda Sorsen Dahlberg. I represent the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway here in Brussels. Thank you to the panel for interesting insights. I was attending a conference yesterday where Commissioner Kubilius and actually your boss, de Groot, Calvino, was talking about the need for funding in defense in Europe. And they were saying, of course, we need more money, but we also need an industry that is ready to support and deliver on the needs. And I think the same could be said for academia. In order to boost defense innovation, we need a tighter integration between academia, civil research, and defense. I don't think we can say yes to this question. I mean, I think the question should be it's not about are we ready to invest in dual use research, but are we ready to act on it? Are we ready to deliver? And I don't think we're there. And I think it was very well highlighted by you, Finneman, with regards to the practical challenges that are now stopping this this tighter collaboration to take place. I mean, in order to integrate civilian research to defense, you need to have clearances, you need to have access to data, sensitive data. There are so many maybe not barriers, challenges, as you say, that we need to address. So I wonder, do we have a plan for this? Do the EU have a plan for bridging the gap between civil research and defense? And then a super quick question as well. I think we talk about funding for research in terms of money follow cooperation. That's how it's been, but I don't think that's going to be the case in the future, because now we're being very selective with our partners. So who will the funding be available for? And of course, as a Norwegian, not a EU member, I shudder at the word fragmentation. Thank you.
Very good. There's just another question here, and then we'll answer and we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Hi, Ella Peltonen from University of Oulu, Finland. And my question is, because now we have been talking about the civilian funding and the military funding, and now creating a new category for dual-use funding. But couldn't we just have funding? Because I work very close with automotive industry, and you can imagine the automotive industry, especially in Germany, do have some links to the German military, and we academics in Finland, we have some links to the Finnish military. So it would be very, very easy to have a single project that has multiple pilots, some on the military side, some on civilian side, something in between, I don't know, new drones flying on airports. So the question is kind of like, sounds like you are making the system very much complicated than it's already.
We're very good at that.
Sorry.
There is one more statement in the front. This is wrong, by the way, the timing.
Sorry to abuse, but
Go ahead.
we in Indra have been present in the European Defence Fund since the very beginning, even in its precursors. The preparatory action in 2016, the EDADP afterwards. I would like to underline two things. Civil and military are different domains, different worlds. Ms. Feyneman explained very well. She didn't want to go into the details, but the details are very important.
Of course.
Are very important. But for me, the good news is that there is a potential synergy in two levels. In the levels of technologies, at the end, the technologies are very common, 99% common. Maybe not in the procedures, but then in the output that we produce, the solutions that we produce, could be shared both at the military and the civil world, precisely because of this hybrid thing. So most of the things that we are going to develop at the stage of the market uptake can be very similar. So I think there should be a kind of transfer of knowledge in some places. And sorry to say that things are more difficult. It is not that difficult. The fact is that the defense sector was a taboo 10 years ago, even 2 years ago, even before the invasion of Ukraine. The good thing is that this sector has normalized nowadays from an industrial viewpoint. And it is as much as normalized as the fact that the Commission is putting 150 billion euros through a different instrument, which is the SAFE instrument, which is lending to member states to acquire equipment in defense. Who would have told me this? So, good thing that there is a level of ambition. I think there are areas of potential cooperation, but still two different worlds.
Very good. Thank you, David. Okay, let's... Well, it depends. Do you want to go for coffee or not?
I have really good questions.
You're really good and short? Okay. But then you'll have a lot to answer in short time.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion.
Go ahead.
So my last question, I don't think really an open door, but I work for the Netherlands Aerospace Center, applied research organization, doing a lot of great work. However, my colleagues probably won't be happy if I ask this, but the thing where I feel in Europe we are wasting an exorbitant amount of money on research and technology is where we not develop one ship, we develop 27 frigates, so we spend the same money 27 times over. How can we get some benefit in that? How can we scale up not only on the production side, some EDF work, which, to be fair, is not a lot in total if you look at the national budgets for research and development in defense. How can we get some further synergy there?
I know there are more questions, but I think we're going to have to take a step. Go ahead. Who wants to start? And we'll go with the tour and wrap it up. Manuel, you start.
Maybe very, very quickly to the question specifically on, what is Europe doing? The colleague from the Tromsø University was asking. I think you yourself were sort of answering the question as you formulated it. Indeed, this is one of the things that we are looking at, how to create better connections between the civil research instruments and the defense research instruments. Now, I think there's an immense amount that we can learn from the US experience, and of course, historically, the way of the trickle down of technology was precisely from defense research to the civilian applications. So we have to learn how to do that, not exactly as it was done in the US, because this is a completely different reality, but to establish these links between the programs and these possibilities to spin out technology from military research to the civilian dimension, and vice versa. Think about not only pure research, but about opportunities for startups who are civilian startups, but who maybe have applications that could have an interest for defense applications and therefore could benefit from defense, for example, procurement, which was just mentioned now. So I think we have to be better in trying to integrate these different instruments.
Can I make a quick comment? I've heard a few times people saying that production isn't there. Actually, production is here. So you guys actually have achieved high levels, even outpaced the United States in production. Where the problem is the long-term demand signaling and the political will to invest to get to the level of procurement that I think Europe understands it needs now. Europe is coming from a very, very weak position, and that's part of what I think is the problem with the Europeans' views towards Washington right now is because it's a little bit of recognition of how do we allow ourselves to become so weak and become so strategically vulnerable. It's slightly embarrassing. But that means you have to do exactly what we're talking about, reduce the fragmentation, break down the barriers, aggregate demand, reduce country-specific things. If you're going to buy off the shelf, you don't have countries say, well, we want a hatch to come out here and be able to do this, or we want to be able to eject on the left side, not on the right side. These are kind of things that allow for 27 different types of helicopters or 3 different kinds of fighter jets, etc. That will not work. Europe has the funding perhaps right now to get there, and it has the production capacity to get there. You got to convince the lawmakers to put in the political will and over the long term to give the big contracts. Because when I go to defense industry across Europe and the United States, one of the biggest differences is the signaling. We're not going to invest in that X, Y, and Z program because we don't have reliability 4 or 5 years down the road. That requires too much investment for us right now. It will essentially collapse our business. That's a key problem.
Verena.
I would like to comment on that and also on this last question, why we have to develop 27 solutions and cannot plan it differently. Maybe it's also an advice or an idea of when you see now the planning of the EDF topics, for example, you have type of a planning process where the member states check what their capabilities are, what they need, and then they bring it together, discuss it, and all this planning goes into the EDF topics. Of course, we want to keep with Horizon or FP10 or however it's called in the future. You may not want to go on this level of planning or being descriptive. It's always a criticism of that the calls are too descriptive and what you want. Oops, sorry. But in the EDF, you see there is in the future maybe a procurement also behind these calls. So because when they talk about their capabilities, we know that that the military wants to have these solutions and hopefully to buy it in the future. So you have kind of a market, and hopefully these solutions will help the market.
An own market upfront.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not like 100% and always fitting, but generally there is this market. But what are we going to do with the when we want to merge this? It's kind of the question also not only in terms of the practicabilities of the merging civilian and defense research, but also the question of how much can we plan ahead, or do we want to plan ahead with an FP?
I'll stop you here. Robert, you
yeah.
can wrap up. You've got
wonderful. The lady from Finland
few seconds.
asked for simplification.
And
it
funding,
starts with
I
an
heard.
S. It's wonderful. The gentleman from the Netherlands said we need to scale up. I fully agree. Thirdly, my final remark, it's not demand from ministries of defense which should be leading. It's also the market which should offer things which might be of interest 5 years from now for ministries of defense. And ministries of defense all procure in one way, like they are buying a platform with a lifetime of 30 years. That doesn't exist anymore. So we have to adapt. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking the speakers.
And I'll have the pleasure to moderate this final leg of our conference today. I hope you had a good break. You had plenty of coffee, so you're energized again for another hour and a half of discussions. I will start by introducing Sergei Nazarenko. He's the head of the Office for Identification and Countering Threats to Critical Infrastructures in Ukraine. He will give us a presentation on how Ukraine has been handling threats, especially to its energy sector. And then I will sit down with him for about 10 minutes to do a quick Q&A and see what Europe can learn from Ukraine's experience. And once we're done with that, we're going to move on to the final panel, which will focus on space technologies. So I'll stop talking and I'll invite Sergei to give his presentation. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I will try to show you briefly the current situation in security area in Ukraine, and not only about security, but it's much more about resilience of energy system and might be better. First of all, I want to show you our point of view about different characteristic feature in current situation in security area, not only in Ukraine, but also in European Union country. First of all, it's a strengthening interdependence between power system. You know that all power system in European Union is united, and power system from one country has a big dependence from another, and this interdependence still growing. And in this, in the connection with this statement, we can remember the situation in Spain with the blackout. Then everybody is understands the increase in the dependence of electricity, rapid change in security situation in Europe, in the whole world, future development of renewable energy sources, and physical security risk, hybrid threats, political influence of from the side of different unfriendly countries is still growing. The strategic objectives of all power systems, not in Ukraine and in European Union, first of all, it's maintain the resilience of power of energy sector. It provides the insurance of security, stability of electricity, and supply for primary resources. Next, one of the main tasks is providing the flexibility of power system and future decarbonization. But in current situation, one of the main tasks is providing a clear and high quality forecasting, prevention and response for different crisis situations. Before the war period, Ukrainian power system was also unprotected and unprepared for such crisis situation like full-scale invasion. Some facility our facility haven't any engineering and military protection. Population, business, and public sector were not ready to work in condition of electricity outgates. We had a limited mechanism for ensuring stability of electricity market during crisis situation. We haven't any algorithms of categorization and prioritization of critical infrastructure facility. And also our physical security didn't correspond to real threat. The same situation today we see in European country. What measure was improved in Ukraine to maintain the power system during war period? First of all, we organized the system of risk assessment and information exchange between different entities which are responsible for maintaining the resilience of power system. We provide the categorization and prioritization our critical infrastructure facility because it's impossible to protect everything and it's not necessary. Engineering protection also was implemented. Engineering protection of main and most important critical infrastructure facility. Now we have several levels of engineering protection. First level is simple construction, and second level is concrete construction under the most important critical infrastructure unit. It's a unique design made in Ukraine during the war. Also, we provide our own mechanism of interaction between military authority, local authority, and secret service and different private company. We also provide the reserve of critical equipment, training for employee, training and the special algorithm of for dispatch control teams, backup for communication channels, and also we implement all possible international standard of cyber defense. Now, a strong international cooperation between TSO, between different international entity, allowed us maintain our power system in situation of full-scale military invasion. From our point of view, the complex solution, the model how to maintain the power system during and before different crisis scenarios, we can see on this picture. First of all, it's a continuous analysis, risk and threats, and take into account regional aspect. But in this case, I want to underline that in European, according to European legislation, risk assessment procedure provide every 4 years. In Ukraine, we make the risk assessment every month. It's a quite different approach, and it allows us to quickly react for different type of risk and threats. Then, categorization and prioritization on critical infrastructure facility is one of the main points that need to be done because we can't protect everything, and we have a leak of resources, leak of different military, engineering resources, and the main it's financial resources. After these 2 steps, we need to provide a complex solution. with implementation, military, engineering, physical, civil protection, control internal violators, improvement electronic warfare, its protection against drones, and arrangement of reserve of equipment and materials, employees training, and cyber protection. And the backside of this process, but one of the most important, it's continuous interaction between different actors who are responsible for critical infrastructure protection. And intersectoral cooperation, and cooperation with private company, and international cooperation. Priority task for in current situation for Ukraine, for European Union, how to increase the level of security and resilience of our power system. First of all, it's a development of regulatory frameworks, threats analysis. We need to improve our mechanism, our common mechanism of threats analysis. I say about common mechanism because Ukrenergo, it's a part of NCE, and in fact it's only one Ukrainian company who in fact are in the European Union. Also, it's a system of categorization and prioritization critical infrastructure facility, development a standard of engineering, military, and physical protection. And one of the most important things from my point of view is feasibility study and model of protection against different kind of threats, especially physical threats. What it mean? For the most effective using the resources, the money, and different other resources, we need to combine different kind of protection of our power system. It's a military protection, engineering protection, reserve equipment, and so on, so on. But we need to find a right combination of different kind of these sources, and we need to make an estimation and which kind of this measure is cost. And after that, we can implement the most effective solution, and it calls that we will have a protected power system. The next point, it's a complex solution. And also, we need to establish a mechanism for exchange the information, because it's also a very big I think problem or maybe task between the TSO in Europe, between the different entity which is responsible for resilience of power system, because many kind of information are sensitive, many kinds of information is closed according to national legislation, and for exchanging this information, every operator should have a special permission from competent authority. Without exchanging this information, we haven't the possibility to provide a real measure. I want to make task, but it's not so good to see. It's a provide the stability of power system in any critical situation. It's a brief presentation of our analytical activity of Office of Identification and Countering Threats. It was established in Ukrenergo after the war started. First of all, we collect and analyze all information about different kind of threats, military, economic, informational, international, hybrid. We provide a monthly analysis and a special report about these threats, and we provide the solution for different governmental actors, Security Council, Ministry of Energy, and other actors. We provide the report with our proposal, what need to be done to provide the security in current situation. It's a brief presentation about our point of view and our proposal, what need to be done for all of us on regional level, on European level, to increase the resilience on our power systems. Thank you very much. And
let's sit down for a few minutes. I have a couple of questions for you before we move on to the next panel. So, what kind of can you tell us a bit about what kind of research, what kind of technologies have been deployed in order to protect this critical energy infrastructure?
From my point of view, one of the biggest tasks for European country and for Ukraine also, it's first of all, it's improve the risk assessment mechanism, improve the legislation, and after that we need to implement for us, most important, it's an engineering solution and military solution for protection the most critical elements of power system. Because it's really very expensive solution, but we need to find a right combination how to protect power system with and not to have very big expenses.
Right. So, in what research fields do you think Europe should invest in the coming years so it gets ready for such threats?
Excuse me.
So, what research fields should Europe invest in? So, where should public investment go so we can get ready for this kind of stuff?
The priority research for us is it's a standard for different kind of protection. It's making a standard, common standard, different kind of protection. Then it's development a new solution of engineering protection of some elements of power system. And also it's a military solution, especially in field of counteraction drones.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and final question, is there a way to organize a platform for exchanging know-how with Ukraine and the rest of Europe?
Yes.
Exchanging know-how and expertise in
yes,
this field?
we are working on this field, but it should be a platform based on regional level, because not some countries they have their own risk and threats, and they are quite different. For example, if you speak about Russian neighboring country, it's some kind of threats the most relevant for them, and for country on the south of Europe, for example, it's a different another type of threats, and that is why I think that yes, this cooperation should be, and this platform should be under the umbrella of some maybe NATO or European Commission, but it should based on regional cooperation with some country. After that, we can present the result of our cooperation for European Commission.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your answers. We do have a minute or two if you want to ask Sergei any kind of questions. I'm not sure if there are any. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. Please join me again in thanking Sergei.
Героям слава!
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we're gonna go ahead with the final panel of this conference, which will focus on the role of space innovation for defense and security. And for that, I am very happy to be able to invite on stage here with me. We have Kate Robson-Brown, who's Vice President for Research, Innovation and Impact at University College Dublin. She's also president of the European Low Gravity Research Association. So please join me on stage. We have Francesco Toputo, full professor of space systems at Politecnico di Milano. We have Stijn Vermouth. He's head of user outreach and engagement at the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. And online, we have someone from Italy, a special guest from Italy, Marco Brancati. He's Senior Vice President of Technology, Innovation and Systems Architecture at the Space Division of Leonardo, the defense company. So, hi Marco, nice to see you.
Hi everybody.
Good. So, as we've heard today, this conference is mainly about figuring out what to do next in the context of EU's preparedness and resilience strategy. So that means being prepared for all sorts of threats, military aggression, hybrid war, cyber attacks here on Earth, but also in space. And the strategy also has a component focused on climate change and extreme weather events. So again, topics where space technologies are highly relevant. So we're going to try to unpack all of this, but I want to start with a question to you all, and that's related to recent news coming out of the European Parliament here in Brussels. There's a new multi-annual budget being negotiated that will include a research program, a space program, and a defense program, and a competitiveness fund on top. But so in that context, maybe MEPs are talking about the need for a 60 billion budget for the space program, for the EU space program in the next MFF. So this week they've sent a letter to Ursula von der Leyen to request that figure. So my question is to the four of you, what do you think of that figure, and what would you like to see in the future in terms of EU support for space R&D? Yeah, Stijn, go ahead.
Just to complement what Marco indicated on what it would mean in terms of investments for the future. It's not only the amount; it's also how you invest it. And defense or security, resilience building of society can't be detached from space. Space is really the source of a lot of elements which we rely on in our daily lives. So you need to defend it, so enough money needs to go to defending those assets. Both think about driving in your car and using Galileo or GPS. It needs to be protected. It's also about telecommunication. It's also about Earth observation satellites. And this is the angle from where I'm coming. Mm-hmm. When you want to build a society which is prepared, which is resilient, you need the data. You need the means, the tools, the accessibility to those data to be able to act upon. Space is a very important source of this data because through Earth observation you can map a larger area than what you can do just based on measurements on Earth. And this is something on which we need to keep on investing. It needs to keep on investing in the satellites as such, of course, with all its sensors, with all the features, but also the derived services and the derived tools and measures to do something with this. Think about machine learning, think AI, so artificial intelligence. Think about developing tools which enable you to ingest all this data. Think about the way that you transfer these petabytes of data into kilobytes of information. And this is something which comes with a lot of effort, and where the private sector also plays an important role. R&D, SMEs, and Europe is switching in very brilliant SMEs, and they need to be activated. So 16 billion, great, but let's see how it will also pan out in terms of how the investments will go to the industry, into value-added services and this type of things.
Thank you very much, Kate. I saw you nodding over here, so go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in. So I agree with everything that's been said. I think that these are the things that we need to do now for the near wins. But I think it's also really important that we think about the years ahead as well, and what might we want to do in order to be resilient in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time. Yeah. And I'm going to suggest there are 3 areas that I think it'd be really great for us to invest in. One of those, I think, is small sat sovereign launch for Europe. If we're able to be in control of our own constellation, small sat constellation launch for task and finish missions, I think that would be a game changer. It's not something we're going to solve overnight. There are many sites, launch sites that are developing at the moment. We may not see all of them become successful, but we could see quite a few, and I think that's something worth supporting. And the second thing is building on what you've just said around AI, bringing together the AI revolution, the digital transformation revolution that we see on Earth, together with edge AI, autonomous systems, swarm robotics, mission control, kind of automated mission control. I think this is going to be something that, again, is a real game changer in the future. I mean, edge AI particularly, if we have the opportunity, we're already starting doing this, right? I'm not saying anything that's kind of revolutionary, but if we have the opportunity to do more compute in space, we can do some of that work. We don't have to ship all those petabytes down to Earth, kind of transform them and then look at them. We can do some of that transformation in orbit and just downstream the stuff that we actually need to use to kind of engage our systems. I think that's going to be super interesting. And then the last of my three pieces is around, if you like, the circular economy in space. It's really expensive to ship things up to space. What we need to be able to do is think about putting in place new technologies that allow us to assemble, to service, and to manufacture parts and structures in space in such a way that we might be able to reuse them. And that could be new materials that can be broken down and 3D printed again, or it might be parts that you can take apart and reassemble in different ways. I think there are really interesting novel ways of thinking about that kind of sustainability piece in space that would set European research and technology ahead of what's going on in the rest of the world.
Francesco, what's your response?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's been said almost everything, but I'll try to give my 2 cents to this. To answer your question, let's see first where we stand as Europe in the space sector. Let's take a snapshot. And before talking about what we need, let's see if and where we lead. We actually do lead in Earth observation. With, Copernicus has been a real masterpiece of example in Earth observation for civil application. And as Europeans, we are more, let's say, sensitive to environment, so we are a little bit more environmentalists than other, or more ecologists. And we are leading at least in regulating space debris, so all of the pollution that is out there and we are causing out there in the space. Where are we lagging? We have mentioned access to space, launchers. I think it's the most critical item there, and I would like to support my claim with some figures. I was checking this morning before coming here the number of launches in 2024 by country. US has launched 146 times and over 130 times with the same company. China has launched over 60 times. Russia had 17 launches last year. Guess how many launches did we have from European companies?
Less than a dozen, probably?
3.
3, okay.
3 launches. 1 with Ariane 6 by French Arianespace, and 2 with Vega by Italian Avio. That's it. This is so we can talk about mega constellation acting in space and so on and so forth, but if we don't have access to space, there's no strategic autonomy. We cannot cover all of the life cycle, and I think this is the most urgent priority that should be dealt with.
What do you think should happen next to fix that problem? I mean, I know it's a huge issue.
It's huge. However, we can see the glass, let's say, half full, because what we need is not like a magic technology. Technology is already there, okay? What made the success of US companies was reusability of the launchers, okay? So we need to enable this. We need to enable reusable launchers, which in turn can lower the cost and can trigger a completely different market in Europe. Because now, I mean, the waiting time there's a monopoly. There's a clear monopoly out there. And the waiting time to launch a satellite can be up to 2 years, okay?
Right.
So there's quite a big demand of all of startups and companies that would like to do business in space, but you have to queue and wait for a US company to launch your satellite.
Mhm.
And we cannot answer the demand that is there. There's no offer.
Right.
Second, I do agree with Kate about in-space operational services. The European Commission is putting quite considerable effort into this. I'm consulting with EC on the so-called ISOs, in-space operational services, and there is this new ecosystem that is being creating of having. It seems like a science fiction, but in the near future we can have gas station in orbit, orbital warehouses where you can store components, and servicers that go back and forth to refuel satellites and so on and so forth. This is the next big thing, I think, in space. For many reasons, for reusing, for triggering a circular economy in space, but this has a clear, crystal clear dual application, okay? Because in the moment you can refuel a satellite or manipulate it to replace components, you can also destroy a satellite. There's a clear, I think, dual use component there, which also is in the spirit of this event today, and I think this should be pushed. The European Commission is pretty well positioned. We are almost there. I mean, the European Commission has been promoting enabling technologies for this. We are a little bit far from seeing the first missions, but there will be a pilot mission. There will be a call issued in few days, actually, and there can be a pilot mission by 2028 for this.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to the issue of launchers? Are there any ideas or comments on that specific issue? I don't know. Yes, Kate.
I can just say one more thing, which I think we need as a community to be maybe more supportive of stumbles along the way when it comes to. We tend to have, well, certainly maybe in Ireland. I come from Ireland, but we tend to have a sense of if something doesn't quite work first time in space, if something doesn't launch perfectly and land perfectly, there's a kind of backlash against it. And I think we need to understand, or maybe us in the sector need to get better at communicating the process of R&D development in the launcher space, so that we don't give up on launch sites or launch initiatives at the first stumble.
Right. I don't know, Marco, if you have any comments on this specific issue.
I share what Francesco said. Just one side comment to slightly minimize or shorten such huge differences in terms of figures. Of course, the launches that have been performed by some countries is related to the need to put in place some constellations, I mean, which were of course developed sometimes by the same company who performs launches. So, but this is true. I mean, this is true, as well as I share the absolute relevance of in-orbit servicing in the next future for managing at the best the LEO orbits, for sure. And so it's very important, I mean, autonomy, all the techniques that allow autonomous activities together with robotics. This is something that, of course, can better support the appropriate management of LEO orbit, so to space close to Earth.
Yeah, is Leonardo going to be involved in a development and deployment of any of these exciting technologies? And which kind of brings me to a question I had for you on the fact that the company has recently launched his space division. So, what do you want to do with that?
Yes, sure. And by the way, thank you for the question, because it allows me to make reference to the purpose of the new space division in Leonardo's setup. As probably most of the colleagues know, that Leonardo was already involved in space activities since long before the establishment of the new space division, but it was mainly focused, let me say, on the development of onboard equipment. So again, robotics, development of solar arrays, development of star trackers, so onboard equipment. And involved through the joint venture with Thales. So Telespazio on one side, Thales Alenia Space on the other side, for both services and manufacturers. The reason why Leonardo decided to put in place a new space division is because actually wanted to have a larger visibility in this environment, and also wanted to take advantage from the in-house existence of know-how relevant to some of the technologies that in an agnostic way are going to support in a clear way the future space activities. Some of them have been already mentioned. As well as the availability of large high-performance computer that again was set up to better support all the Leonardo business, but together with the huge amount of data, observation data, utilization of artificial intelligence solutions, of course, are going to feed more and more the presence and the role of Leonardo in space. So, for instance, in-orbit servicing is going to be a very important goal for the future of Leonardo Space Division, as well as, I mean, the manufacturing, the internal manufacturing of a private constellation in order to provide geoinformation services for ISR. This is something that is another short-term goal for Leonardo.
Right. Thank you, Marco. Kate, I wanted to ask you this: is there room for smaller companies to participate in this booming sector?
So yeah, so I was gonna jump
so
in.
The question is, how do we tap into the potential of SMEs also?
I mean, I guess what I'd like to do is give a couple of examples of kind of really exciting companies that I think are doing great things, and one was in direct response to those comments about the kinds of things we might be able to manufacture in space, and why that might be interesting commercially and indeed for kind of dual-use purposes. And one of them is growing crystals in space, which you might not which you might not immediately think, well, that's what we've come here to talk about, crystals in space. But actually, I mean, I know, okay, I'm an engineering mathematician. I look at how systems respond to the extreme environments of space, right? But crystals are really interesting because basically you can grow them much bigger than you can on Earth, because you don't have the kind of gravitational forces, for example, that are pulling on them. So we can grow them faster and we can grow them bigger. And there are two uses that have been kind of posited as being obvious ones. One is around pharmaceuticals, and the other is around crystals for semiconductors. And there's a company, just to pick one out. There are other companies are out there, obviously, but the company called Spaceforge, who's an SME, who are really quite far down that kind of maturity pathway towards developing an in-orbit manufacturing platform, specifically in the first instance for this kind of growth of crystals for these dual markets. They've just gone through their Series A funding, really exciting, and I think companies like that will become a key part of the kind of supply chain for in-orbit manufacturing, for assembly of parts, and for particularly the kind of biomedical manufacturing and pharmaceuticals in space. And that for me is a really exciting development. I mean, there are other companies that are going through similar stages, which somebody mentioned, forgive me, I can't remember who, space domain awareness and debris removal. You see the likes of Astroscale, D-Orbit, really interesting, innovative companies that are coming through that early stage, 5 years old, 10 years old, now really giving kind of operational examples of how we might do this in the future. And in a landscape where licensing for launch of small sat, other kinds of satellites might rely on commitments around sustainability and deorbiting, I think this is going to be really important.
All right. Before I move to my next question, I'm wondering if there are any questions in the room or comments. If there aren't, yes, Simon.
Shall I shout? Yeah. Thank you. Kate, I'm really happy you mentioned D-Orbit, because actually at the European Research and Innovation Days 2 or 3 years ago, they were sort of exhibiting. It's actually one of the coolest things I've seen at a European R&I Day, sorry to say. But anyway, the point being, in terms of the whole competitiveness agenda going beyond pure security or space tech and innovation, is there a market for space debris removal? I mean, is there a commercial incentive for Europe to be getting very good at this? And by extension, what could the European agencies be doing to promote this more? That's a question to you, but also to everybody else on the panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'll answer briefly, and then maybe I can pass on. I see two different types of landscape that are creating a market, and one is a genuine concern about space domain awareness and debris and Kessler effects, all that kind of stuff, risk to in-orbit technology, and that's before you start thinking about kind of proximity operations of the kind that have been mentioned here today. So I think yes, there's an absolute, and it's only going to get more so as we grow larger and larger objects in space. So if we're thinking about space solar power, for example, then we're talking about building satellites which are the size of multiple football pitches in space. We're going to need really sophisticated kind of space drones to service. We're going to need to know what debris is around. You only have to look at parts of the space station that have come down. I mean, Tim Peake took a lovely photograph of the cupola. I don't know if anyone saw that, with the kind of transparent surface of the cupola with the damage from probably a piece of debris that is less than 0.5 millimeter in diameter, probably less than that. So this really is something that we need to solve. So that's one bit. There's an absolute. And then I think there's also a regulatory landscape and kind of licensing framework where companies may need to be compliant in the sense of they will need to demonstrate they're either able to bring their technology down, or they might park it in a higher orbit, but maybe that's not a long-term solution, or they may be needing to recycle it in some way in order to do something else. But so I think there's going to be a regulatory imperative as well. And I should just quickly say that just burning stuff up in orbit may not be the whole solution. And there's research going on at the moment as to the impact of burning up materials in the high atmosphere and what that might do in other ways. So these are other conversations that are ongoing in the research and engineering community at the moment, I think, that make the ecosystem really interesting one to look at.
Yeah. Is there anyone else wanted? Yes.
Yeah, if I can add, I mean, I'm a little bit more pessimistic for the market on space debris, because, I mean, as of now, I would say the answer is no. There's no market there, otherwise there would be a business out. But let's think in perspective. Who pays for cleaning the roads in town? Institutions, taxpayers at the end of the day. There can be a similar market like this. I mean, we cannot afford to store debris in space forever, otherwise we are not going to use the orbits anymore. For centuries, not for, I mean, this is a serious threat that has been kind of underestimated so far, but it should be tackled. There is, I mean, being compliant with regulation. Now ESA just signed a Zero Debris Charter, one of the most stringent regulations worldwide, and you have to be compliant. However, in developing technologies for removing debris in space, you can reuse them for doing business, real business, because the business is in taking over another satellites. There's the geostationary satellites, those that we use to watch TV or for telecoms in general. They have a finite lifetime because they run out of fuel. There are a few companies now, some have been already mentioned, that are studying how to go to those satellites and to take over the orbit and attitude control of them with another automated satellites that attaches to the one that ran out of fuel and takes over its operation, orbital control and so on. That is this business. You can use the same, almost the same technology that you use to remove debris in space or to deorbit defunct satellites to do other business. So I think it's a very good line of research and innovation.
Yeah. Marco, do you see a business case for space debris?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it was slightly touched the topic when talking about rules and how, which are the rules you need to fulfill in order to have access to space. So in other words, I mean, we know that in the different countries, a specific space law is going to be established and take into account. In Italy, it was just approved yesterday, if I'm right. But you know, if there would be a global space law stating that in order to have access to space and have the right, I mean, to be in space, you need to fulfill specific laws. If you are unable to do it, you could rely upon services provided by a specific party doing just that job for you. I mean, that could be, for instance, a way to look at it.
You mentioned global laws, and we're going to come to the subject of geopolitics. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the weather. Stein, this one is for you. I mean, satellite data, Earth observation data is crucial for weather forecasting and you know, modeling how, you know, our resilience in the face of extreme weather events, which we see more and more often, thanks to quote unquote climate change. And do we have the tools to gather and manage and analyze all that data? And can we do more with it?
Yeah. Space and weather is, of course, very much connected. So the rise of numerical weather prediction came because there was a capacity to invest in supercomputers, so high-performance computing, and this was in the mid of the 70s, and the arrival of satellites. And this enabled us to go further than 3 days. You can go to medium range, and you can go longer. And this is essential when you want to predict long-term effects. The weather you see today originated, in fact, 4 or 5 days ago, and you need to be able to track this. And this is very important, for example, for hurricane forecasting. Now, this has been a silent revolution for very long. So every decade, we were able to predict 1 day better. So very slowly. It's called by nature the silent revolution. And you saw also a difference between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, because in the northern hemisphere, there's a lot of measurements on Earth, a lot of weather stations, radio sondes. The southern hemisphere, more oceans, but also less development. With satellites, it all changed. So you saw these gaps closing. Now, with the arrival of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we are talking about a whole new thing. It's completely different. So you see that the amount of computing power which is needed to do weather forecasts has changed a lot. Of course, you need a stable and model. You need to have the data on which these algorithms are trained. And through Copernicus, we have this data. It's open and free, and that's why there are so many companies who have jumped on it and invested in trying these algorithms. But also the institutions like us, we also invested in an AI version of what we're doing. So AI is really a game changer if it comes to weather forecast, climate predictions. Another thing is investing more in Earth system modeling. So looking at the Earth as a system and developing digital twins. So we have been investing a lot in the development of digital twins. So we pretend the Earth in a digital way.
So that's a copy,
digital copy of the Earth. And if I could have shown you some images of a real observation and an observation purely driven by the computer. And it's nearly exactly the same. It's amazing what we're able to achieve. This is driven by the Destination Earth initiative by the European Commission, DG Connect. And through this, we can really do this very high resolution assessments for extreme events, but we can also do the scenario runs, because once you have such additional twin of the Earth, you plug in your physical elements and you plug in your socio-economic elements, and then you can do scenario runs. What if scenarios? And this is very powerful for decision making. So if you want to build a more resilient society, if you want to be prepared as a policymaker for certain events, these type of tools are very strong to advance on certain on certain needs. So this is really combining what space brings, Earth observation, what the digital agenda brings, AI, high performance computing, and then the science. And this is something which also adds to the whole agenda of being prepared, being resilient to all the changes. It's not only needed for Europe, it's needed for the Earth and and not for the sake of because we love each other, also of course, but because
less so lately.
Because there's a lot of conflicts and a lot of situations which are driven by unstable weather. There's a lot of things which are driven by climate change, droughts, harvests which go wrong, people who start to migrate, conflicts which are created, a lack of water, drought, and this can't be ignored. And it's affecting also Europe as such, and not only here but also in the territories. So we need to invest in this type of things at a global scale, also to be prepared for this.
Do you want to respond to this? No.
Just yes, always.
Yes. Okay.
I've got three suggested. Anyone out there is interested in doing research in this kind of thing? I've got 3 suggested areas. One, it's really hard to predict precipitation. So even when if you've got kind of Earth observation, there's some really interesting work going on where you've got ground weather stations that are measuring rainfall, for example, and then you're kind of matching that up to your digital twin model. So I think that's...
You're from Ireland, right?
Yeah, we're okay for rain. Right? No, but I'm a visiting professor at Strathmore University in Nairobi, and we've got a project there where we're looking at matching up village rainfall and predictive models. So that's one. There's fewer data from satellites equatorially than there is polar. So if you've got countries that are living in areas where there are equatorial storms, there's really interesting kind of areas of research there to refine the models that you're talking about. And then the last one is space weather and the impact of space weather on Earth weather. So I'll just leave those thoughts out there in case there's anybody who wants to start another PhD or something.
Okay, good. I'll move to the geopolitics questions because we're nearing the end of the session. So let's continue with the weather from that perspective. So considering the scientific turmoil in the US with the Trump administration defunding NOAA and all sorts of other crazy things. Is there an opportunity for Europe to take the lead in observation and space-based weather forecasting?
Well, there are two components. One is the political element. The second one, is there an opportunity to take the lead in Earth observation and weather forecasting? I can say we already took the lead. We are the best in Europe in terms of weather forecasting. I think if you ask somebody, even from our friends in the US, if there's a comparison between our models in Europe compared to, and it's not only ECMWF where I work, but also UK Met Office, for example, is also very strong and has a rich history in this. We are setting the pace in Europe. In terms of Earth observation, I think Copernicus is much more advanced compared to what the US or others are doing. Now, coming back to NOAA and the fact that this affects certain elements where we can see opportunities, I think what's important is to disentangle a political situation with a need for collaboration. When you work on data-driven solutions which are global, you need to collaborate. You need to make sure that you have data from all over the world. And the US is still our ally, so there may be some very, very difficult situations, but in the end, if it comes to science, if it comes to collaboration between scientists, we have been collaborating with NOAA since the 70s, and we are still at speaking terms with our colleagues in the US. And they, of course, have issues also with what's happening at the political level. So collaboration is key. Collaboration is key for weather, for many other things. In space, I think also in outer space, there's still collaboration going on, so that's also the case. And if, of course, there is a gap in certain regions, like in the Caribbean, for example, where there's a need to complement, we have to prove as Europe that we are the stable partner to trust on. Yep. So that's I think my answer to the situation.
Francesco, how do you see the global space sector
you asked,
in this difficult
you asked if there's a
geopolitical context?
If there's an opportunity for us as Europeans. Short answer, yes. More articulated answer, it's much more complicated than that. I mean, and somehow it's also said what's happening. The White House has proposed to shut down missions that are flying around Jupiter now, or Pluto. It took 20 years to design them and many years to reach the planets, the outer planets there. And they just would like to shut down the mission. And it's, I mean, for ones that works in space exploration like me, this is extremely sad. There's an opportunity, yes. I mean, we can replace that, but
it's going to take another 2 decades.
It's gonna take a lot. I mean, we have the capabilities in Europe. We are already doing that. We are flying missions to asteroids, for instance, to the European Space Agency. But it's not the way it should be. There is an opportunity. Well, we have now the Choose EU to attract talents. The ERC, for instance, has been putting in place measures to attract talents. So there's a clear opportunity there. But I do think that the US wouldn't step back from all of the space activities in which there's a market. I mean, they are probably the best in doing business in the world. And as long as there's a market and there are activities that are profitable, they won't step back. So LEO and Moon, they will be preserved. Unfortunately, science and exploration activities will be seized.
Marco, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this specific issue or a reply to Francesco.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I agree with Francesco. Of course, the new geopolitical situation is going to have impact. We will see how it will impact the next ESA ministerial conference that will be held at the end of this year. I agree that there is an opportunity, probably for some specific activities, there is a larger opportunity for Europe. Namely, I would like to refer to the activities relevant to Moon. And this is something staying on the space exploration, as Francesco said. I mean, this is really something that all of us working in space are willing to understand how it will evolve. Now, you know that looking at the most important European companies, not only talking about the Italian ones, I mean, the effort that was put and the positioning which was reached for initiatives relevant to the Moon, I mean, is very important. Of course, it was done in conjunction with NASA. Now, I mean, there is such a situation. We really don't know whether US will keep to be involved in the Moon exploration, or they really want to switch to Mars. Francesco said something very important. US are very good in making business. So there is a question, I mean, concerning the so-called lunar economy, okay, which was one of the most important topics addressed in the last few years. I mean, nowadays it is well accepted that there is the possibility of a moon economy, also thanks to non-space companies that have identified the opportunity of business for being present on the moon. Honestly, to see a Mars economy is something that is really tough. Okay, it's really tough. So this is definitely something that we will see. I mean, how it will go in the next ministerial. Remembering that there are some programs in danger, for which Europe, prepared itself. And when I say Europe, I'm referring to their space companies, of course. So the lunar gateway, so the activities on the moon surface. So this is something that is also sad. I mean, it's also sad, as Francesco pointed out. I mean, we still received some weeks ago some beep from the Voyager's mission. So something that was really started in the 60s, launched in the 70s. I mean, so this is the situation. The opportunity probably is there.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know, Kate, do you want to have the final word on this?
Well,
can countries still work together on?
So I think one of the most powerful legacies of in-orbit activity in my lifetime has been its nexus for peace building, for science diplomacy, for countries coming together to work for the kind of common good through science, even when their host nations may not be talking to each other. And I'm an optimist by nature. I think that scientists will continue to work together, and I hope that we can facilitate that as profoundly as possible.
Okay, well, we'll end on the optimistic note. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists. So thanks very much for your time, and thank you for being patient up until now. Big thanks to our online audience who have been patient as well behind their screens. I also want to thank the Science Business Network and especially Indra for making this event possible. And yeah, I would want to invite you to stay tuned. Check our website. We have a bunch of events coming up after the summer break as well. And don't forget to subscribe to our news. Thank you very much.